Welcome to Reimagining Us. I'm Nichole Argo, the founder and executive director of TogetherUp. My co-host is Scott Hutchison from E Pluribus Unum, and we are thrilled to be joined today by John Sarrouf from Essential Partners.
Hi, John.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. What a great opportunity this is to just talk about this work.
We're really excited to have you. Why don't we start out with the basics? Tell us a little bit about Essential Partners. What do you do?
So Essential Partners is an organization that is based on the idea that our differences should be our strengths rather than that which divides us. And we look to help communities build trust in each other and hope for the future because they've come to understand that they need each other in a community and that they can find ways of talking about those things that are vital to their thriving. And we help them do that. We help give them the tools to have those conversations that they need to have, to build the relationships that they need to build in order to do the things that they need to do in order to be a thriving community.
Say a little bit more about that. What conflict transformation or facilitation skill, what are those skills? And can anyone learn them?
Anybody can learn them. They are fundamental. My teacher, Dave Joseph, one of the early practitioners at Essential Partners, used to say, this work is only really useful for people who have to deal with other people. Which is to say all of us. And so it's fundamental. It is sort of the basics of good community, being a good neighbor, being a good family member. These are just very important skills, and the ability to do it yourself, to have a difficult conversation is definitely learnable, and everybody knows how to do it. It's just in difficult moments, it's hard to remember how to do it, right? And so the facilitator, our work is actually to be there to help people remember their best selves. That's all we're doing, is helping people remember that they care about each other, remember that they're part of a neighborhood or a community or a faith organization or a school or an association of some sort that they care to be a part of, and that they know how to have these conversations. So our work is really just meant to remind them of those best instincts, those best selves. And anybody can learn how to be a facilitator, right? Anybody can stand in that role.
So Essential Partners works with facilitation, train the trainer kind of thing. Yeah. What is, and you use the term dialogue a lot in the work. What is the difference, or is there a difference between dialogue and, a well-intended regular conversation?
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap, of course, but dialogue is meant, the purpose of dialogue as we define it, and there's lots of different definitions of this, is for mutual understanding, right? We're stuck in a moment, you and I, where I'm trying to convince you, you're trying to convince me. We're stuck in a pattern where I'm one-upping you, you're one-upping me. I'm not really listening to you. I'm listening for the hole in your argument so that I can attack it. I'm defending myself, and so I'm not giving all the information. I feel vulnerable or I feel defensive, right? And we're stuck in this pattern of attack, defend, go silent, right? All this fight, flight, freeze behavior that comes up when we feel threatened. And this is, sort of a threat response. And dialogue says, okay, hold on. Let's take a step back. We're going to not try to convince each other of anything. We're going to take a space, a moment where we're just going to try to understand why the other person believes what they believe, why it's so important to them, what it means to them in their lives, what stories inform those beliefs, where there's complexity, right? Because one of the sort of casualties of polarization is complexity. And so when people say, we just need to get along, and actually I think what we need to do is get deeply complex and really get into the nuance or the specifics of a situation, it's in that complexity that we actually see more of ourselves in the other person, right? What happens in polarization is you take all of one side and I take all the other. And I put all of my internal sort of, I don't know, there are some times when, and I put that on you and I just say, well, you're just one of those people, you're just afraid of this. And but if we actually went into the conversation, would realize, no, there are times when my beliefs kind of overlap with yours a little bit. So getting into the nuance, getting into the specifics of it. And that's what we're trying to do in dialogue. We're trying to get to understanding. And if we can do that, if we can shift the conversation, we begin to build some relationship, we begin to build some trust, and it's in that process, humanization, right, that we begin to build the possibility of a new kind of conversation, of a future relationship.
I have a follow-up. Is
Go
that
for
okay?
it.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking two things. I'm thinking about listeners too. It is, what if I think you're nuts?
Yeah.
And how do I not have a heart attack?
Yes.
Like holding all of this in.
Yeah. I mean, that's so great. And the truth is, people ask a lot, like, well, what about the really difficult people? It's like, well, I'm one of the really difficult people, right? If I'm in a situation where I feel really threatened, if I feel really upset about something, I'm one of those difficult people. And I can feel like other people, people in my own family, I've said, gosh, that's nuts. But the truth is that those beliefs come from some place in that other person. And if we get down to the deep place of values and story and identity, we actually begin to see, well, this person comes to a very different conclusion than I do. But they have some of the same values that I have. They really care about their children. They really care about the future. They really are, hopeful for some opportunity that they're hoping to have. They just have a different, conclusion about how to get there. So when I get to that place, I tend to set aside my judgments about them being crazy or nuts or whatever the thing is, and I say, okay. That's interesting. So I often describe dialogue as going from, yeah, but what about this to, that's interesting. Tell me more, right? And that's like one of the core skills of dialogue. We teach an exercise called keep a question in your pocket, right? For those moments when you're really provoked and you feel like just saying you're nuts, right? When that's what's on your lips, can you keep a question in your pocket? When you can't stay curious, you could just pull it out and read it, and it says, and this is mine, that's interesting. Could you say more about why that's important to you? Like, that's my go-to question. Everybody could have their own, whatever it is for them, but that cues me back into curiosity and my ability to stay in relationship. So literally, when my impulse is to say, you're crazy, I can't even have a conversation with you, my go-to is, that's interesting. Tell me more about why that's important to you.
Oh, love that.
Okay, I have to inject a personal story here.
Good.
Because you said the words, tell me more. And a couple years ago, I had the pleasure of taking one of your briefer facilitation trainings. And then we've used that and worked with Essential Partners for some community work. But the area where I most get feedback about my own transformation is in my family. So my family, my kids' friends, the friends of our family, it is a running challenge, a joke. Tell me more.
Yeah.
At breakfast, we're making dinner. Before bed, all of us have taken that question in the pocket in the times when we're not threatened and the times that we are. But that you don't have to put a lot of thought into it, but you do want to hear more from this person.
Yeah.
And just to say, okay, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
It gets you past, it's been for us a pause during the times of difficulty where it gets you past the feelings of that moment and refocused on the curiosity, on the desire to listen to something that is difficult, and usually bringing new information or emotions or values to the fore, getting them past whatever position, right?
Yes. Yes.
So there's something profound in this silly statement, tell me more, that has now become a joke in our entire network. And I have to say, I marvel. I see my daughter, my 10-year-old, do it with her friends. And it transforms everything. It transforms people, conversations, and culture.
It's great with kids, especially because kids don't often, elaborate, how was school or what those kinds of things, and just say more, tell me more. We think of it as an invitation. We want questions to be invitations to go deeper. And lots of people don't actually make much space for themselves. They're not sure that their voice is valuable. And just that one simple phrase, say more, tell me more, is an invitation to say, no, your voice is valuable. I want to hear what that means for you. Go deeper.
And if you're the skeptic, I'm afraid sometimes I am,
Yes.
it gives you that moment to say almost to yourself by saying, tell me more. In my mind, I would go, and this cannot be the end of that story.
Yes.
And it stops me from thinking that's all there is.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So
That's
right.
great.
Right.
So I guess that leads me to the next question, which is, how do people do this? If it's something that we can bring into our everyday lives, use in almost any conversation, like what are those tools? Tell me more was one very concrete piece that that came into my life, but I remember that training as a series of components on mindset. On actual, like, here are things you can say and do. What does someone who goes through your training, I don't want to give away I don't know if you can talk about this, but what are some of the core themes?
Oh, we want to give it away. That's our goal. We're a nonprofit organization. We're just trying to get it out into the world. One of the things I say is, there are like, 10 of us on staff and another 20, 25 facilitator associates. And we're just trying to heal the world. So we need help, so it's the point is to get it out there. There's a few different ways to approach it. One is to understand what's going on. And I know that's one of the things that you're trying to do in this podcast. And it's such a service to the world to get some of these ideas out there. What happens in a community when we polarize, or when some decision has to get made, or when an incident happens. We go from being sort of our everyday, lives, where we go in and out of different relationships. You and I might sing in the choir together, and you and I might have kids that play soccer together, and we might share different parts of our lives, and we do that well when we're, thriving and in a sort of dynamic community. We volunteer at different places. And it happens in almost every community. It happens in mine. Some decision happens. Where are we going to build the new school? Or it could be an election, or an incident happens in the town that sort of begins to put us into different camps. You're pro-charter school and I'm anti-charter school. You're, for, having the playground be built, in this area, or the pickleball courts to be built, right? There's one of the polarizing issues in our country right now. Whatever it is, and then we start to get into these camps. Okay. That's fine. Around, election time, we're getting into our camps right now. We put yard signs up and sort of we have our camps. That's part of democracy. We promote certain ideas. And then hopefully we make the decision, and then we go back to being in relationship with each other. But what happens is we tend to minimize the differences within our group. Like, all of us agree with this, right? And they all agree with that. And we begin to clump, and we get rid of that nuance and the complexity that we talked about earlier. It becomes really hard actually to moderate within your own group. I'm not sure if you've had the experience, but with whatever party you're in, if you're in a group of your friends and you're all talking about the other party, and you might say, actually, I really agree with that other candidate on side. That's a hard thing to say within a group of like-minded people, right? There's a pull to be the same. If you don't manage that difference well, you begin to go further up your polarization and you begin to think of each other as opponents. You begin to accuse each other of things, underhandedness. I heard that they were talking to the person in government and, there's rumors about this. And you see people writing newspaper, editorials all the time. And we've gone now from opponents to enemies. I mean, Pew and all the other research organizations will say that people now think of each other as enemies and make real accusations of each other. That's where conspiracy theories come from on both sides about each other. And we've lost the ability to go back down to the community level where you and I might, still shop at the same store or sing in the same choir or take our kids to the same parties or whatever it is. All of that ability to, and I've seen it happen, where advocates for education in our community so divided that they stopped working together altogether because they had different takes on whether to have a charter school in town. They stopped writing grants together. They stopped volunteering together. And what happens to the rest of people, so only the loudest voices are left standing, and everybody else says, this is too toxic. I'm out of here. I just can't deal with this. And they just stop showing up to things. And the only people left are the people that are the loudest and most polarized. So that's one thing that we learn in the work. Sorry, that went on too long, but that's one thing that we learn in the work. But so then now what do you do about it is the question. How do you bring people back down into the many parts and many identities and many beliefs that they share so that you can re-knit that community together? And that's part of the work of Essential Partners in Dialogue, is to bring people back down to their lived experience, to their hopes, to their stories, to the things that are important, because conflict flattens people, right? Polarization makes us one-dimensional. Dialogue makes us living, breathing human beings with lots of, overlapping needs, desires, and the possibility of being in community. And so we have to bring people back down into those many layers of our lives. And part of our work is to help people sort of, bring the color back into each other, bring the three-dimensionality, the humanity back into one another.
How, thinking about the examples that you gave, is there a difference, or is it the same process? When you look at issues that have divided this country over our lifetimes, when it's things that someone can't control, like the color of my skin or who I love, or when it's something that I can't walk away from. I can move away from the pickleball court. I can't move away from my neighbor I don't like. Well, maybe I could, but I'm not going to.
All the more important, right? That's all the more important. Those are the moments. And I learned this when I was actually doing my research over in Lebanon, in the villages in the mountains of Lebanon after the Civil War in Lebanon from 1975 to about 1990. For about 15 years, many different factions. So we won't go into all of that. But in these villages in the Shuf Mountains where I did my research, there were Christians and there were Druze. Druze is a population of sort of an offshoot of Islam that's particular to sort of, the Levant in general. And talking about how those communities have begun to re-knit after the war and how they stayed in relationship, what they said to me was, we had to. We were sort of 50-50 living in a neighborhood. The only person who can give my grandmother an injection is the Christian doctor. The only person who knows what's wrong with my olive trees is the Druze arborist that lives down the street. I can't not talk to these people. I have to be in relationship. And I don't necessarily have anywhere to go. I can't just I don't want to get up and leave, right? So this is when customs begin to come into play that help people knit their relationships. And one of the things they talked about was weddings and funerals, right? Weddings and funerals. You always invite people from the other community to weddings and funerals because those are the big fundamental life moments that it's important to stay in relationship. And those relationships are fundamental. And it's the same in our country, right? We don't want to move from our neighborhoods. I don't want to leave my faith community just because we have differences. And the truth is, even if we do, or we get into our smaller, more like enclave, we're going to find differences there too, right? And we're going to want to divide from them, and we're just going to I sort of talk about it, we're all going to end up in a church of one, right? If we just keep dividing and dividing rather than learning how to live across these differences and seeing them as our strengths.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I love that, because one of the foundational learnings in social psychology is that we are all multitudes,
Yes.
right? We have 1,000 identities, and you can make the seemingly silliest attribute become a marker of important difference,
Yes.
right? Like if you two are circles, you just get a paper that says you're circles, and I'm a triangle. We'll start to import meaning into
Yes.
these things. And if then Byron, our manager, comes over and says, here's a bunch of pencils and fun swag, you can hand it out, turns out that we will hand more to our group. And difference can be made of anything.
Yeah.
But also complexity can be brought back into anything.
Yes.
We all have something that we share.
Yes.
And what you say is a reminder of that we, in any given moment, are making a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Are we focusing on what we share and how to problem solve around differences?
Mm-hmm.
Are we building up a whole mountain
Mm-hmm.
around a tiny difference despite everything in common?
Yeah.
I loved what you said earlier about polarization flattening people.
Yeah.
Because we often, in this podcast, we're talking about dehumanizing others.
Yeah.
But when we're flattened, we've dehumanized ourselves.
Yes.
We've lost our own humanity.
Right.
So this is just, it's giving so much. But I have a question for you that I know you've heard before in some of the common circles that we're in, and that is a pushback to dialogue that often comes about where people are like, I'm tired of talk. Talk is talk, but it ends there. There's nothing wrong with understanding each other, but how do we build further?
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes when dialogue comes up in a bridge building conversation, folks will say, that's great, but we need to collaborate, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do something. How do you respond to that kind of pushback? Where does dialogue sit vis-a-vis these other tools?
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's great. And I would say if you want to collaborate, go for it. That's great. Go, do it. And then the difficulty comes when you try to collaborate before you've built trust and relationship and understanding. You begin to get into negotiation and a lot of push and pull and sometimes stalemate. And so that's where dialogue comes in. It's really, I think, the foundation of any collaboration. Should be the dialogic skills. I mean, it's really patterns. It's the opportunity for people to listen deeply, to share something meaningful, and we get into a collaborative situation often without some of those skills, and we end up feeling like there's scarcity, and I need to get my voice across, and I talk over you, and I interrupt, and I'm not listening. We need to actually set some new patterns for our relationships. And so dialogue is really about building new patterns that will serve us, will build trust, where people's full selves are invited. And then absolutely, if you want to and feel moved at that point to move to action and collaboration, do it. Keep some of those same patterns, right? It's still dialogic. It doesn't have to be a dialogue where you're just trying to understand each other. You can continue on to action, collective action, but keep it dialogic. Keep the patterns of deep listening, invitation, reflection, asking good questions. And when you get stuck, go back to dialogue, right? And so yes, it's all sort of part of a continuum. We never say that dialogue is just talk. Dialogue is action. It's a kind of action. It's building relationships is action. It is, and it's vital to sort of doing things together, and it's important. And the truth is that if there are some groups that if you say, hey, can we come together, we want to collaborate, they say, I've got nothing in common with them. I'm not going to collaborate. I'm not going to, they don't understand me. I don't understand them. No, I don't want to be in that room. Okay. Let's take agreement off the table. Let's not worry about whether we're going to try to come to agreement. Let's just try to come together and try to, feel like you can be understood by the other person. Mm-hmm. All right, I'll come to that. Okay, I'll come to one session. Right. Sometimes that's where our work was designed. Essential Partners started with the most polarizing conversations and was built for that. It's gone on to be used for all kinds of things, even sort of, helping people during isolation, during COVID, helping people just, come out and be heard and find community. But it was designed for the most polarized conversations where the idea of collaboration wasn't on the table at all because just talking to each other was too difficult.
I love these conversations because it gets my head spinning in ways. I'm just a lay person, it's like these are all sometimes really new concepts. Yeah. And it's so interesting. The first thing I thought of is like, I'm not going to run to a polarizing conversation.
Right.
I need to go to the grocery store. So it's like, how do you get the reticent, risk-averse person who it's essential,
yes,
no pun intended, to get them into this conversation to create a community around it? What's the first step somebody does? I mean, what do you do to entice me to say, okay, I'll do it?
Okay, so there's two answers to that. One is that we actually want these conversations to be part of our everyday lives. It shouldn't just be that we're going to have a polarized conversation and we're going to put up posters and people are come over. This is our theory of change at Essential Partners. And sorry, I should have said this earlier, but the idea we train facilitators, they go into communities that are hurting, that we only go where we're invited, where people are really feeling a need to have a conversation where they feel stuck. Right, in a synagogue, in a mosque, in a school, in the YMCA, whatever it is. So we go in and we help facilitate those conversations. We teach people to facilitate their own conversations because this won't be their first conflict. That wasn't their first conflict. It won't be their last. Right, so they need to know it and learn it. But beyond that, it should just be part of who they are. So every time you go to a PTA meeting as a parent, it should be a dialogue. It should be set up. You're going to be choosing what the school play is. You're going to be talking about which holidays to celebrate or which cultural activities to bring in. That shouldn't be a special polarized conversation. No, this is just the way we set up our PTO meeting. We get in a circle, we have a connecting question. We go around the circle so that everybody can be heard and people are, get to know each other a little bit. Then we ask a few questions and we get everybody's voice in the room. We have everybody listen to each other. It's just the way we do things. And you see that at that meeting and you see it, your child has it in their social studies classroom. And when you go to, the library, to a book club, it's a dialogue and the city council is set up like a dialogue, right? It should just be everywhere. That's the dream, that's the goal, and then these just become part of everyday lives. But your question was, okay, there is an issue, a polarized issue in your community. First of all, we tend to try to invite the community to be a part of creating it. Like, is it important to that community member, to that person? And we hope to make them feel like it is important to them and that they could have a voice, right? It's important to know that people can, actually make a difference. So we want them to have a sense that they can make a difference. So the invitation is always really important. But then we also want people to understand that the way we do things is not the town hall meeting where people are going to get up and shout at each other. We're going to be in relationship. We're going to ask people to deeply listen to each other. Can I tell one anecdote about this?
Please.
Okay. So about 6 or 7 years ago, we were asked to do some work on guns in America. And we don't just jump in and start doing work on a situation unless we really understand the contours and the nuances of it. So we were doing some research. I got a little bit of grant money, and I invited people who were sort of pro-gun or sort of gun activists, and then gun safety people or gun regulation people, however people wanted to define themselves, into focus groups. And I asked some people who were gun advocates to come on an evening, and I just wanted to ask some questions. So I had a friend who knew a bunch of these people from the Rod and Gun Club, and they invited them. I showed up with my whiteboard, and my markers and a stack of pizzas, and I sat down, and immediately I got barraged with a bunch of questions about who's paying for this? What are you trying to do? You're never going to convince me to get rid of my guns. This is silly. Okay. I get it. Yeah, maybe this is silly. I don't know. But I brought pizza. Do you want some pizza? And do you mind if I just ask a couple questions? Okay, sure. Ask your question. So I asked, tell me about your first gun. Where'd you get your first gun? What's the story of your first gun? Of course, we heard stories of grandfathers handing down guns from their grandfathers. We heard stories of the first hunting day of the season. We, sort of intergenerational, wonderful, neighbors supporting a neighbor who felt very afraid and learning how to use a gun and supporting all the way around. So I'd write all this down on the whiteboard and taking notes. They seemed okay. So I asked another question, and so tell me how you think about, what people think about you, what you think people think about you, and what do you wish they knew about you, and then go around the circle. About an hour and 15 minutes into it, a woman raises her hand, one of the women that said, "This is stupid. You can't talk to the other side." She said, "Could we do this with people on the other side of this issue?" And I said, "Yeah, you could. I thought I heard you at the beginning that you didn't think that would be useful." She said, "Well, if it's going to be like this, that's different." And I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" "Well, like we're really talking and listening to each other, and you're asking questions that are feel important." And I said, "Okay, why would you want to do that?" She said, "Honestly, I am so tired and exhausted by walking around my own town feeling misunderstood and feeling like I have to hide who I am, and that people who, when they think of a gun-carrying person, have all this animosity. I don't want to live like that anymore." And I said, "You don't have to live like that anymore. We can have these dialogues." And all around the group, everybody agreed that they would come to a dialogue if we had one with somebody on the other side. And that experience taught me so much about what we have to do to help people see that this is a new way of being together, that we don't have to feel alienated from each other, and that actually connection and belonging is more important motivator than fear and animosity. We just have to give people the opportunity of it.
That's a remarkable story, and it is actually one that we have seen in our work as well, that it demystifies and just blunts the fear. And you'll hear this in other episodes of this podcast, which is like you actually see somebody.
Yes.
You're not anticipating this blowback or this fight. It's like, who wants to do that? Exhaustion.
Yeah.
That, there are a lot of choices to be made in that,
yes,
and you can make the choice.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Scott, to your point, it reminds me very much a couple months ago in focus groups where we would enter in these conversations with community members who are saying, "Well, I don't have time to have conversations like this. I'm really busy. No one knows where to start. It won't make an impact, blah, blah, blah." An hour in, having these connecting conversations about how people feel, what they desire, what their hopes are, these women were, one in particular, these women were ending saying like, "Oh, I would do this.
Yeah.
I didn't know you meant this.
Yes,
this
that's
absolutely.
it.
We have
That's
time for this,
right?
right?
That's it.
And it's so interesting because we can sit in this field and know what we're talking about, what we're offering, and why people want. But when people hear about having conversations, they're not imagining a meaningful exchange. They're imagining what they see from pundits or in the national discourse, and I think, maybe my great aunt, I grew up with my great aunt, would have people over all the time to disagree about issues. Yeah. That was back in the good old days of ideological polarization, right? Like you feel like that, I feel like this. Okay, talk to me. Let's get to the best answer here. Yeah. But today we don't really have that in our lives. So I think those national divisive conversations, that's what we're imagining. People are pointing towards us, and sometimes they really are.
Yes.
We can't get past the idea of conflict versus conversation.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that's the default in someone's mind.
Oh, yeah.
And remembering that, it's the fear. Right. And you're right. Once we start to, how do we replace that with, oh yeah, here's where I learned a new perspective.
Yes.
And we both walked away feeling stronger and heard and belonging, right?
Yeah.
Learn how to keep a question in your pocket.
Yeah. I'm supposed to have a question in my pocket right now. I have a question for you about scale.
Oh, good.
Because we have talked a lot about how individuals and communities can be transformed by this. I want to know, how do we change a nation? Say 19,000 municipalities throughout the country. And the reason I'm asking this is because a prior conversation that we had, you talked to me a little bit about theory of change. Can I quote something you said?
Oh, goodness. Yes, sure.
You were talking about a funder, a conversation you had, and they said, "John, I'm a little worried about funding you all because it feels like we have wildfires eating up the country. And all I'm doing is paying firefighters." And you thought, on the one hand, is that the worst thing? We need more firefighters. But then actually, I think we're redesigning communities to be more resistant to wildfires. Yeah. So that when the next fire comes to this community, it becomes a barrier to the conflagration that would normally take place. So you ended with, we make resilient communities who know how to turn towards each other rather than away. I mean, that's completely profound because most of us today live in communities that are turning away.
Yes.
Right? So my question is, how do we get this to more communities? How do we scale this in your mind?
Well, it's such a big question and a wonderful one, and I think it's important for our field, for us here to be thinking about that. And I think of it two ways. I think about scaling deep, right? That once you've got some group of people in a community, your firefighters in your community, your facilitators in your community, how do they help teach others to do this and to have this, as I said before, be the way we are together, to be part of everything? And so we think a lot in our organization about the cornerstones of our community. Who is it in your city, your town, your village that has as part of their mandate, as part of their consciousness, the social fabric of that community? It's the schools, it's the interfaith clergy, it's the YMCA, and we're doing a wonderful project with YMCAs around the country right now. It's the library, it could be the city councilors, it could be, Lions Club, all of those associations, the people who really are active and care about, and people who think about how to bring people together to talk about things. If we can get this approach, this way of thinking into their hands, right? This doesn't have to be a professionalized thing, right? Any lay person can do this. My daughter, as a student at the high school, facilitates in the school and in the community for adults to have conversations Everybody should be able to do this. And so if you continue to train deeper and deeper into the community, people know who to turn to when a really serious thing comes up. But beyond that, fewer serious things come up because we've just integrated this approach into all of our conversations, all of our ways of being. We've built more relationships. The interfaith community is already, deeply connected because they've been doing dialogues, not in the most difficult times, but in all the times in between. A wonderful story of Columbia, Maryland, if I can just say this wonderful interfaith group there that we worked with for about 5 years. Started off with six congregations, a Jewish synagogue, the Muslim community, a UU church, the Black Baptist church, the Methodists, and the Catholics. It eventually became 60 different congregations around the area, all coming together every year to dialogue. This was inspired by the late, great Elijah Cummings, God rest his soul. And one of the stories that the Rabbi Susan Grossman tells is that because of the work they had done in their interfaith clergy group, when there was a shooting at a synagogue in another city, and the Jewish community came together to hold a vigil, she had to go outside. They did not have room inside their synagogue for all the people from the community who had come out to support the Jewish community in Columbia, because they had built deep and lasting relationships with people who wanted to show their support for the Jewish community. She had to go out into the parking lot, and there were cars parked all the way down the street in every direction to say words to the people that were waiting outside, right? That's scaling deep into a community, building the connections and the capacity to have these conversations. And then we scale wide. What we learned in Columbia is now being used in the Triangle area and, down in North Carolina, is being used out in Sheridan, Wyoming, is being used in Little Rock. And at Essential Partners, we're trying to be a bit of a hub. And I think all of your organizations, in a way, are trying to be a bit of a hub for this learning. So if you've figured out how to have a really good conversation in your 10th grade classroom about what's going on in the Middle East right now, well, let's get that information out to all the 10th grade teachers so that they can have a better conversation with their students, right? And it's about networking and networking wide across a network of communities. Communities learn from each other. I mean, that's really how I think we make great change. There's a wonderful chapter in the end of Thomas Friedman's book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded. I think that's what it's called. And he talks about the unit of change that he really envisions for the world. And it is the sort of small municipality, right? It's the city, small city, big town, where you can actually make a difference, where you and I can step up, get a group of people together and make a real difference. And then those communities learn from each other. And in that way, we spread and become resistant to the next big shock that wants to dehumanize, wants to divide us, wants to other us. We already have relationships, and we say, no, we don't do that here. I'm not going to talk about those people in this way. That's not how we do it in my city.
This has been a remarkable conversation. Thank you for the frame, the ideas that you bring. I hope this isn't our last conversation.
I hope not.
And, this is a more moment. I hope people who are listening also get inspired and kind of demystify the opportunities to move past things that might be difficult. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. And just so, as we said at the very beginning, this work needs to get out into the world. We have a lot of free resources on our website for anybody who wants it. We have trainings that are open enrollment trainings. We have scholarships for people who can't afford to do it. And so please reach out. If you're hearing this, you feel inspired to be that part of the change in your community. Anybody can do it. Just give us a call.
Essential Partners.
Essential Partners.
Amazing. Okay. My brain is on fire, and yet we still have to close.
All right.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you so much.
Enlightening.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Until next time, stay connected, stay hopeful, and keep reimagining what's possible.
See you next time on Reimagining Us.